Welcome back everyone to the second edition of my new show, There's Only One F in Freedom. A regular show that I will pick a particular topic or topics and we'll go through them bit by bit. We'll examine some videos and we'll talk about what's hot. Now today I want to talk to you about the Charlie Kirk assassination. Now this is a very difficult subject, obviously a very delicate subject. And I want to start by saying that I am absolutely not a conspiracy theorist. I like most people, I enjoy conspiracy theories, but I very rarely, if ever, agree with them. I like to look at the evidence, see what's right in front of my very eyes, listen to what the authorities tell us, which in years gone by I've tended to believe and given them the benefit of any doubt. These days, obviously, that's a little bit different, but the Charlie Kirk assassination, I don't know if any of you have been following the videos that are coming out of America. There is one conspiracy theory after another. Some are quite outrageous and ridiculous. Some are a little bit more believable, but in all honesty, let me give you my position on what I believe happened. I believe that everything you saw was genuine. I believe that, obviously, unfortunately, Charlie is gone. There are people out there suggesting otherwise, but that is just frankly ridiculous. There are second shooter theories. There are theories that the guy that is alleged to have done it wasn't carrying a rifle when he jumped, etc., off the building. Look, I've studied all those videos and I've studied the shooting itself on a number of occasions. Not pleasant. So my position is that what we saw happened. What we are being told is mostly correct, if not entirely correct. But there is one issue that I just cannot get out of my mind. It's a circle that I can't square. And look, before we go any further, for any American viewers out there watching this, look, us Brits, we are not as firearms savvy as you guys. We don't have access to firearms, especially large caliber centre fire rounds. We don't have access to those weapons, or very rarely, or very few people have access to those weapons. So from a firearm perspective, us Brits are pretty uneducated, but I do have some pretty good firearms knowledge myself. It's not, I wouldn't even go anywhere near as to describe myself as an expert. I'm categorically not, but I have fired a number of centre fire rounds. I'm very familiar with the 2.2 rim fire round, and I'm pretty savvy with guns, right? I've used shotguns for most of my life, and so I've been around firearms. I'm not a complete novice or a newbie when it comes to talking about firearms. Now, the 3006 Springfield is an incredibly powerful cartridge. This is the cartridge, or the bullet for my UK viewers. This is the round, the cartridge, the bullet that is said to have killed Charlie. And the 3006 is a very old round. It's been around for a very, very long time. I think about 100 years. Is generally used and is suitable for game hunting, North American big game such as like deer, elk, moose, and even black bear. And in Africa, it's used for, or it has been used for, games such as leopard. Now, all of those animals that I've just mentioned there, all of them, their consistency as a living being is generally quite a lot stronger and a lot more, let's just say, bullet resistant than a human. Moose are huge, elk are huge, black bears are huge, and leopards are very, very big indeed, with a very tough skin, thicker bones, etc., etc. Now, the 3006 bullet can be, I call it a bullet because my UK viewers will understand that better. A 3006 bullet can be used for smaller game, but it will be considered overkill. You don't need a bullet that size to kill, for example, a fox. That would be overkill. But even with bigger game, even with much, much larger game, big boned animals, big creatures like bison or brown bear, you can still dispatch those animals with a 3006, although you probably need to have a headshot or a slightly better shot than you would perhaps rather than with the smaller animals. Now, as I've already said, the human body is none of those things, none of them. It's much less dense and it's much less resistant to such a powerful cartridge or bullet. And the 3006, I've written this bit down because I want you to understand where I'm going with this and why I have a question mark over what happened or what we're being told. The 3006 cartridge or bullet carries around or somewhere between 2,700 to over 3,000 pounds of foot energy. Now, that might not mean a lot to a lot of you, right? But let me give you a further example. I'm going to put a picture up on screen now. Now, on the, I don't know if it's your left or my right, whatever, but I'll just say the larger bullet there, the larger bullet is the 3006, the one that is alleged to have killed Charlie. The bullet next to it is a 22. It's a rimfire cartridge, which just means that when the trigger is pulled, the gunpowder within the cartridge is ignited in a slightly different fashion. But at the end of the day, they're both bullets, right? The larger round is a centre fire round. But if you look at the smaller 22 cartridge, now that carries somewhere between roughly 70 to 100 foot-pounds of energy, yet it's still powerful enough to kill a fox stone dead at 100 yards, or even further if you're a good shot. And that .22 caliber, the smaller bullet that you're looking at there, has very often over the years been the cartridge of choice for assassins across the world. It is a very, very dangerous and often underestimated round or bullet. And I believe the statistics in America will tell you that more people are killed in the United States with that 22 round, the small one, than any other bullet that exists. And the reason why is because it's cheap, it's readily available. The guns that I use to fire that round are usually cheaper. There's very little recoil, and if suppressed or silenced, no gun is actually silenced, but if the noise is suppressed, it doesn't make a great deal of noise. By stark contrast, the big cartridge there, the 3006, is a very, very large hunting round. It is used to kill medium to large game. Now, if you look at the difference in the jacket on both of those bullets, the jacket being the outside cartridge, the bullet being the top, the piece at the top. So on with the .22, the smaller round, the dark bit is the actual bullet that's going to hit the projectile that's going to hit its target. And on the big cartridge, the bullet that you would call a bullet that's actually going to hit its intended target is the copper looking piece at the top. If you imagine that the rest of that cartridge, the bit below that, is filled with gunpowder and primer, etc., you can see the amount of difference in power that you're potentially getting from those two different bullets. Remember, the smaller bullet carries, let's just say, roughly 100 foot-pounds of energy, and the bigger one carries around 2,700 to 3,000 pounds of foot energy. The difference is absolutely immense. We are talking about the difference between someone firing a stone with a catapult and a cannon. That's basically the difference we're looking at here. Now, when I first watched that terrible moment when Charlie was shot, having used the 22 rimfire round myself on a number of occasions, I've fired hundreds of rounds, or hundreds of those, we call them bullets. I fired hundreds of 22 rounds, both suppressed, that's with a silencer for want of a layman's term, and unsuppressed, both subsonic and supersonic. Now the difference between subsonic and supersonic is the speed of the projectile. If it's to try and silence a bullet, it has to be under the speed of sound. If as soon as it breaks the sound barrier, that is when you get that smack, that crack, that bang. And you can often hear it echo as it breaks the sound barrier. Again, I'm talking in layman's terms, mostly for a British audience here, guys. So American viewers are probably sitting there going, what is this bloke talking about? You know, does he think he's talking to us like we're idiots? I'm not addressing my American audience at all here. They will be teaching me stuff, not the other way around. When I first heard that shot, my initial reaction was, ooh, that sounded like a suppressed 2.2, or maybe I don't know. My initial reaction was that it was a 22. When I heard it again, it sounded like a larger caliber rifle, possibly with a suppressor or a silencer, but I believe that no suppressor was found at the scene. So the report that we heard, and the report in this case I'm talking about, is the noise. It's the report that you get from the rifle, from the muzzle blast to your ear. That the noise that you're getting is the report that the gun is sending to your ear. The report that I heard didn't add up for me, but we're still nowhere near, or we're just about to get to my main issue with what we saw. Now, having spoken to you about the difference in power between the short little 22 round that I just showed you and the massive 30-06 round that I just showed you, what does that do to the human body? What does that do to anybody, in fact? Well, I can tell you now, this isn't Hollywood. This isn't a James Bond movie. This isn't a good guys versus bad guys film. The 30-06 is absolutely catastrophic when it hits the human flesh, when it hits any flesh. Again, when I saw that initial strike into Charlie's neck, as someone that has used a relatively small amount of firearms, again, from the report that I heard, the noise, the crack from the gun, I thought small caliber. The second thing, when I saw the wound to Charlie's neck, again, my reaction was small caliber, in stark contrast to what we're being told. Now, the only possible explanation that I can think is that perhaps, and I guess ballistic tests will tell us as things are made more clear, that maybe, just maybe, it's possible that there was a subsonic load used in that 30-06 round. Now, that means that you would reduce, again, in layman's terms, without getting scientific, what it means is that you would reduce the amount of gunpowder. This is very basic layman's again. You would reduce the amount of gunpowder in that cartridge to make that bullet travel at a much slower pace when it leaves the end of the barrel, keeping it under the speed of sound. And that is obviously going to reduce the foot-pounds of energy when it strikes its target. That is a possibility. And some hunters will use subsonic rounds to try and suppress the noise that they're making. But bringing down to below that subsonic level for such a large round is not as easy as it sounds. It can make the gun inaccurate. It can make the bullet inaccurate. As far as I'm aware, at least I shot 308s, which again is a smaller cartridge. But when you start putting subsonic loads into they don't behave the same. And to me, if you are going to be shot with something like a 30-06 bullet, again, I'll put it up on the screen once again. If you're going to get shot with something like that, it's like being hit head on at 1,000 miles an hour by a car. You would not expect to see someone hit at 1,000 miles an hour by a car, only to find that there's just a graze. That's physically impossible. So let me show you a little bit more about what I mean. I'm going to play you a little bit of video now. And don't worry, there's nothing horrible coming up. I've chosen not to use any pictures or any video from the actual event. You've all seen it, and if you're that interested, you've probably watched it on a number of occasions. If you're a conspiracy theorist, you'd have probably watched it 100 times to try and find something that doesn't make any sense. I've watched it loads and loads and loads of times, firstly because I found difficulty in getting it out of my mind. The horror, I suppose, morbid fascination, the sadness of losing such a lovely human being and a great, lovely father. But also the illegality surrounding it. Why would someone do this? You know, so there's a lot of things that would interest people without them getting into the realms of conspiracy theories. But I want you to watch what a 30-06 cartridge around a bullet does to ballistic gel and also to a very large piece of pork, which is probably equally, if not more tough than the human flesh. Now remember, Charlie was hit in a very soft area of the neck, probably one of the worst places that you could get hit. There's no bone behind it. There's nothing there. It's just flesh pretty much, right? Until you get to the spinal cord or whatever. I'm not a boxer, but you know what I mean. It's not a lot, but it's not like your wrist where you've got, you know, a couple of, maybe a centimetre of flesh before you get to your bone. So let's have a little look at this now. We'll play it and I'll stop it.
We'll take a shot with the 30-06, and this is a 24-inch barrel, 178 grain precision hunter.
So 178 grain cartridge, which is, you know, I think is obviously a very powerful cartridge again. This is ballistic gel. That looks to me to be about, I don't know, a couple of feet in length. Certainly a lot thicker than any human neck. I'm sure you'll all agree with that, right? And now ballistic gel is reckoned to be about as close as you can get to human flesh. Okay, so what you're going to see now is pretty much what it would do there or thereabouts to the human body. I want you to watch what happens to this piece of ballistic gel, which is about what, 7 or 8 times the thickness of someone's neck, maybe even 10 times. Let's have a look. Now there it is in slow motion, right? So that piece of ballistic gel probably weighs quite a lot. It's pretty heavy stuff. It's like gelatin. Not the most scientific to test our examples, so let's carry on.
Now we'll take a shot at the pork shoulder with the 30-06.
So this is a pork shoulder. Now this is much more comparable to the human body, much more comparable to the size of someone's neck. I mean, it's a big neck, right? But it's much more comparable. Let's have a look what the 30-06 does to this piece of pork. Bearing in mind that there is no liquid in this slab of meat. There's no blood, there's no anything. It's dry, right? So you won't see any liquid necessarily. You won't see any liquid coming away from this piece of meat because it's been dead for a very long time. Let's watch.
We kind of use the 30-06 for a baseline in this video. It's been around for over 100 years. Everyone knows what it's capable of. It can take down every animal probably on this entire planet. Pretty much ripped this shoulder right in half. Obviously, we had massive damage from the 30-06, and this is exactly what you'd come to expect from the cartridge.
So let's just watch that bit again. Let me just rewind it. Look at the damage that it does to this piece of meat.
The 30-06.
Now you saw how that exploded, right? You saw how that exploded. The bullet has gone in one side, caused massive tissue damage, and out the other, and probably travelled on for about another mile, unless there was a backstop, right? When you look at the incident with Charlie, all you see is a small entrance wound about the size of a 2p piece on his neck, with no exit wound. No exit wound. Now behind Charlie was that big white tarpaulin with "prove me wrong" on it, etc., whatever there was written on it. And again, look, I want to reiterate for anyone watching now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not saying that this didn't happen. I'm saying that there are a lot of questions where this incident is concerned from a ballistics viewpoint and from what gun was used to kill Charlie. And none of this adds up to me. None of this, the ballistics, the weapon of choice, the round that was used, none of it adds up for me personally. If I go back to what I was saying about the lack of an exit wound, that cartridge wouldn't just cause an exit wound, it would cause a hole, something like that. So it would go in very small, the bullet would expand, although it wouldn't have a great deal of time to expand because the neck isn't that big, but nonetheless, you are talking about a huge exit wound. Even if it was only the size of an apple, that would roughly be the size of exit wound you'd expect to see. And of course, the human debris that would go with that. And where would that go? It would go everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Like I said earlier on, this ain't Hollywood. This is real life, right? This is not where someone walks in, goes pop, pop, and the bloke falls down on the floor and he's laying there like he's asleep. This is real life. The human debris that I would have expected to see from such a large caliber round just wasn't there. It's indisputable. There is no human debris coming from that wound. I mean, it just doesn't add up. It really doesn't add up. Like I said, going back to the analogy of being hit by a truck at 1,000 miles an hour, and then when you go and pick up the victim, all he's got is a little graze on his head. It just doesn't work for me. So if I'm not a conspiracy theorist and I'm not suggesting anything nefarious is going on, which I'm not, definitely not, what do I think happened? What are the possible explanations for me? Well, I'm finding it very hard to come up with a credible explanation as to how that bullet made so little damage. For me, it's virtually impossible and very, very hard to explain, if you can even begin to try and explain it. So what explanations can I come up with? Okay, the first one is, I go back to what I said earlier on, I've already touched on it, maybe, just maybe, the round used was a subsonic round with a much lower load, far less gunpowder in the bullet, again in layman's terms, so that when that bullet travelled, it travelled a lot slower with a lot less energy, and therefore would have potentially caused a lot less damage to human tissue. Lethal still, but not as catastrophic as a heavy load or a lot of gunpowder in the bullet. That's one explanation, and probably, for me, the most viable one. It would also explain why the gun didn't send a audible report that I would expect to hear from such a large caliber weapon. I go back to my initial, very first viewing of the incident, thinking that it was a 22 rimfire rifle from probably semi-close range, maybe 40 yards, 30, 40 yards. That was my initial impression, which obviously was wrong. I wouldn't have put money on it, but that was just my initial impression. So what other explanations could there be that, and this is where we would start to get into the realms of a conspiracy theory that I don't really want to go down, but is it possible that that isn't the gun that killed Charlie? Now, obviously forensics will reveal all this, and I've yet to see any reports that is actually telling us that this has been confirmed. It's also possible that the bullet ricocheted before it hit Charlie, and what you actually saw there was a wound that had most of the velocity taken out of the round before it hit him. Now, some people are saying it deflected off his body armour, which it clearly didn't. There's no damage to his t-shirt. He clearly wasn't wearing body armour. You can see his nipples protruding through his t-shirt, God bless him, before that terrible incident. So, you know, I can't go along with that one at all. I can't go along with the belief from some people that Charlie was wearing a body armour. I don't believe he was. I don't think that the shooter was aiming at Charlie's neck. I think he was either aiming at his head, literally, right, you know, sort of centre head, or he was aiming centre mass, his chest. Those are the two areas that an amateur or a professional either would potentially, a professional would go for centre mass, chest. An amateur might go for the head, and I suggest that whoever shot Charlie was aiming at one of those two regions and it ended up somewhere in the middle, unfortunately. But I just can't get out of my head what we're being asked to believe was the result of a 30-06 cartridge hitting the human body at relatively close range. Again, I'll show you the size of that cartridge. At relatively close range, I know 200 yards sounds a long way, but trust me when I tell you, with a cartridge of that size, with a bullet of that size and that speed, 200 yards is like Neil you picking up his phone and throwing it across the driveway. It is no distance at all, and with a good scope, you should be able to pretty much take out matchsticks from that distance. I would suggest that the head or chest shot was missed because of probably the pressure, the tension that the shooter was under. They snatched their trigger pull at the last moment and it's ended up where it ended up. It could have very well ended up missing Charlie, but obviously that's not what God intended, right? But again, that's another story. So look, I mean, make of it what you will. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'll be particularly interested to hear from our American viewers with firearms experience, with firearms knowledge, and perhaps even more so, knowledge of the 30-06 cartridge. They call it the 30-06. Same thing, 30-06 cartridge. I'd love to hear what you guys think out in America. If you've hunted with that rifle, if you've used that round, if you use that round in a subsonic capacity, I'd be really interested to know, how do you explain the lack of an exit wound? How do you explain the lack of any bodily fluids? You know, I'm trying to not be graphic here, but how do you explain the lack of any of that in this incident? The only way that I can explain it is that it was a smaller round that caused the damage. Terrible, absolutely terrible. Right, guys, look, I hope you enjoyed that one. As always, I appreciate you watching. Thank you so much, and we'll speak again soon.